Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com and today I'm here with a 6x6 paper pad tutorial. I get a lot of requests for these. I've done many of them in the past and I finally got around to filming and then doing all the work after filming, after making all the cards for a new 6x6 paper pad. Except for this isn't really a very new pad. This came out last year. It is the Doodlebug Hello collection. And I flipped through the papers there, but I also already pulled out the cut apart sheets from the 6x6 pad and I've cut them apart. And those are those little tiny cutouts I'm flipping through right now. When I bought this collection, I also bought the mini icon stickers. And I bought a large piece of the cutout sheet. Recently, and I don't know if this is true for this year because I haven't purchased any new pads, I have plenty to go through. The Doodlebug had switched to these much tinier little cutouts. They work out to be 1.5 by 2 when you cut them out of the 6x6 pad. They're a great size in the 12x12, but when you shrink the design down, they get quite tiny. And so I'm going to be mounting them on some cardstock to give them a little bit more heft, to make them a little bit more prominent on the card. I also wanted to pop up the little cutouts on top of their mat just for, again, a bit of interest, like things just look a tiny bit better when they're popped up just a bit. However, I was having a hard time sourcing foam tape that I really liked, and I also wasn't really loving the fact that foam tape, it adds to the expense of crafting and it has a greater environmental impact, and crafting already does, and it's complicated because I'm eventually going to use some plastic on these cards. I'm using these little enamel dots, but they're in my stash and they got to go, but I don't need to buy more foam tape. So with that said, the point of it is that instead of using foam tape, something I've started doing recently is taking all of my scraps of thick white cardstock, gluing or taping them together, and then using that to pop up my elements. So I'm basically creating my own foam tape, except it's just cardstock and it's not really tape because I still have to add the adhesive to it. But it's something I already have. And in fact, it's something that I was often recycling. I was just throwing these scrap bits in the recycling bin, and now I'm turning them into the pop-up elements on my card. And when I'm using little critters on my cards, I'm often just cutting the die cut a few times with scrap pieces of cardstock rather than using foam tape. So just a little alternative that I figured I would mention, as I think in the end it will be more cost effective. I haven't actually done a price comparison, and it would totally depend on the price of your foam tape, but I really like thin foam tape, and that was much harder to find consistently. So anyway, off that rant for now. I decided to use some sketches, and I will include the sketches in the video description in my product links, except for, of course, it won't be a product. It'll just be a link to the sketches. But there's also going to be a big blog post about all of the cards that I made, and it will include sketches and it will include measurements for the cards, so that you don't have to follow along every little thing I'm doing. I will talk throughout the process, but I'm going to focus more on sharing tips and thoughts rather than giving you every single measurement, because I know that if that's what you want, you can go over to the blog post and just see the pictures of the cards. Also, I know not everyone loves to have talking all throughout the video. Feel free to turn the volume off and just watch and turn on your own music, but there are people who like the talking, and then, I can't make the talking appear for them, but you can make the talking disappear if that works for you and doesn't, offend me or anything by any means. So I picked out a few of the popped up elements, and then I'm going to pick out some papers to go with it based on that sketch. And this sketch was particularly relevant because it had a 2.5 by 2 element in it. And when I matted those little cut apart elements, I matted them on 2.5 by 2. It gave a nice thick border. It gave them a little bit more heft. And so then I needed to cut some 4x3 pieces, which worked out really easily with 6x6 paper because you can cut it 4 on one side and then cut it in half, and you'll get those 4x3 pieces really easily. So I'm going to be able to make a bunch of those. Then I'm going to be left with 2 by 6 inch strips, which will allow me to either make There's a 5 by 1.5 inch strip on the sketch, and there's also a 1.5 by 3.5. Ultimately, though, I'm going to modify those numbers to make the most of the paper pad. So instead of doing a 1.25 and then having to cut up a lot more pieces of paper, I'm just going to cut a 1 by 5. And it will have the same basic idea of the sketch, but it will use my scraps up better. And if you've watched these videos before, and I don't think I've actually formally explained this yet, but what I'm going to do is use up the entire 6x6 paper pad in these cards. And in the end, in case you were wondering, although I think it's going to be in the title, I'm going to make 35 cards with one 6x6 paper pad and a bunch of card bases. I am using A2 standard size card bases because that's what my sketches were based on. That's what I like to make. It's what I have envelopes for, et cetera, et cetera. So I have a bunch of pre-cut card bases. I get really thick white cardstock, cut it in half. I get 8.5 by 11, cut it in half, fold that in half, and make all my card bases. So I think that for these cards, the thick cardstock really makes a difference because I am actually going to leave the cardstock, a good chunk of the cardstock showing on a lot of these. And if there was a lesser quality cardstock, I think that would detract a little bit. I think the quality of supplies matters. So I pulled out 3 papers originally and tried to chop up as many pieces of the sketch as I could from those to make my initial 8 cards. So I'm making 8 cards with 5 pieces of paper. So I guess I must have started with 4 pieces. Yeah, I picked out 1 piece to coordinate with each of the little cut aparts. And then I tried to get as much as I could without going to a new piece. I need 1 more piece of paper to make it work. So that's what I'm pulling out here. I'm trying to pick something that I think will go well with a lot of them. And so I went with this one that's pink it's like a pink wood grain on the front and a dark blue polka dot on the back. And so I knew it would coordinate easily with a lot of the stuff that I was using. And therefore I cut out the 2 additional 1 inch by 5 inch strips that I needed. And I was able to cut out the additional 1.5 by 3.5 strips. And you know what? I cut some of them at 3.5 and some of them at 3. And the logic there was that, again, I was trying to use up scraps. So when I had just enough to cut a 1.5 by 3, I did it. When I had more, I cut more, and that was fine too. Either way, the sketch isn't going to look that much different. Basically, the other way that I kind of accommodated for the fact that I didn't always cut it as long as the sketch recommended is the sketch calls for that piece to be cut in a banner. And if you trim off some of it, you don't have as much room left for a banner. And so sometimes I cut the banner piece or the fishtail look, and sometimes I don't. And to me, again, it was more important to try to use the paper pad in a way that I wouldn't be left with a ton of scraps rather than follow the sketch exactly. However, if you are the kind of person who's struggling to use pattern paper, sketches can be really awesome for that. I have used them to work through several paper pads, and I will have some links in the video description, but they'll actually probably come up on the sidebar as suggested, like other times where I've done this, where I've used 6x6, a whole 6x6 paper pad. And I advocate for using the pads because all the papers coordinate and you don't have to think about it. So I have moved on to, I haven't moved on to a new set yet, but I ran out of enough paper to do the 1.5 by 3.5 and with the 5 pieces. And I don't want to go to a new piece because, as I've mentioned, that's not the point of this. The point is to use up all these tiny pieces. So I had these little strips of pink paper, and I decided with them being 3 inches long, if I put 2 of them there, it would serve the same visual purpose as that piece. However, it would use what I have. So again, just trying to explain how do I go through it and not wind up with a bunch of scraps? Because if you followed the sketch perfectly, I think you'd wind up with more scraps than I'm going to and less cards. However, that's also totally fine, because I'm just trying to, in these videos, advocate for using up some of the stuff we buy, because I love patterned paper. But I also have, at this point, probably still dozens of pads. I'm, slowly over time using them up, or, moving them on to new crafters who might enjoy them. But I am trying to focus on actually using them instead of just, moving on, because I would rather not spend money on more paper when I have a lot of beautiful paper in my stash. And yeah, so here I show you how to cut the banner. The easiest way for me to cut a banner is to cut down the center and then cut from the sides. I'm sure you've heard that tip many, many times, but trying to cut from one of the edges just has never worked for me. I always wind up with one bigger than the other. So I find the center and I cut from there. This collection, as I mentioned before, is called Hello. And so there's quite a few of the little cut aparts that already have sentiments on them, often that say hello. I think this one says smile, things like that. There's a lot of like camera and phone theme going on. So when I went to grab a stamp set to add a sentiment to some of the ones that didn't have a sentiment, I went to the Create a Smile Hello stamp set. So I think it's called Just Saying Hello. And it has a lot of hellos in it, which worked out perfect. But it gives you a lot of choices of font and size. So I tried to pick that I thought would work. And I have one where it's a really simple, tiny font that says hello there. And then I picked a slightly bigger hello for these yellow ones because they had a bit more space. But I'm about to have a stamping boo-boo here. The only thing about this hello is the top one there. It's pretty and it's scripty, but two things. One, I just had like some kind of, I guess, a glue dot or something stuck to my stamp. So when I inked it inked up the glue dot and made this like circle in the middle of my H, which was a super big bummer. And I'm going to fix it though. I'm just going to use a black pen to trace over it and make that line on the H just a little bit wider to accommodate. However, the other thing is the ink can get kind of trapped in between the letters. And so there was a little bit, and it's hard to see in the video, but I think you might be able to see it in the photos better. There was a little bit of black ink coming in between the letters, which didn't look very clean, but I decided to let it be because there are only so many of these cut aparts. And of course, I could just easily move on and toss those or, recycle them or whatever. But, they're still usable. They don't look that bad. It looks almost more of a stylized thing too. So I decided to roll with it. Next up, I am using a Freshly Made Sketches sketch. I really recommend Freshly Made Sketches because if you go to their website, they have all of their past sketches. So they have new ones and they have active challenges, I believe, still. But they also have all their old ones. And when I'm doing these paper pad tutorials, like to kind of get a whole bunch of sketches at one time. And I do like ones that tend to have more rectangular shapes, just because if you're cutting out a bunch of circles and hearts, it really kind of slows you down when you're, trying to use up the whole paper pad, because I did this all in a single day. Like all the crafting part of it was done over a couple of hours. So if I had to stop and die cut a bunch of stuff, I might get discouraged and not use up the whole pad, which would be fine too. You don't have to use up a pad in a day, but that's kind of the fun of these videos and what people like to see in the video. So that was my inspiration. The blue mat that I have all of those on, and later I'll use pink, is just scrap cardstock from my stash, and it's not from the paper collection. So that is something that I'm sort of adding on to the 6x6 paper pad. I generally try to stick pretty close to just the pad, and then I usually pick like one kind of embellishment. So not like it's one embellishment, but like one kind. Like in the past, I've used ribbon or twine or buttons or things like that, so that I could try to use up a supply while using up a paper pad. So I'll use some enamel shapes later, and then I picked one stamp set, and anytime I wanted to stamp a sentiment, I stamped from that stamp set. Again, to just keep the supplies a little bit more minimal, because another point of these videos, besides encouraging you to use what you have and really use a bunch of it is that you can actually do card making with very few supplies. You do not have to have the latest and greatest stamp set. It's totally fun to have the latest and greatest stamp set, but you don't have to. And you don't have to have a million different paper collections and choices. One collection that coordinates can get you really far. You can make, quite a bit of cards, especially if you like a birthday themed one. Then it can allow you to make a whole set of birthday cards for the year. And, it doesn't have to cost hundreds and thousands of dollars that some of us spend over the years. But this one's a pretty cheap one. Make a bunch of cards. This time when I'm following the sketch, I'm using the part that says any shape, which you'll see again when I post this to the blog, if you're interested, to be the cut apart. And then I'm making a bigger rectangle behind it, and then a skinny big rectangle behind that. But for that little like banner strip in the circle, first off, I'm just straight up ignoring the circle, pretending it's not there. And then the banner strip, I got kind of creative and I made it just a plain strip under some of them, but it's just kind of what worked for me again. Like I'm looking at the little bit of scraps that's sitting next to me, and that's where I'm pulling from first before I'm going to go in to the paper pad and try to find some measures exactly. So next up, I'm moving to another Operation Write Home sketch. The first one was sketch 191, and now I'm on sketch 170. Operation Write Home had a lot of awesome sketches, and you can find some of them still, but unfortunately their website, because the organization shut down a few years ago, they don't have them all gathered on a single website. And so it's a little bit harder for me to link them, or like I just find a lot of them on Pinterest, and then on Pinterest, it's not linking to the original website, or like when it goes to the original website, it doesn't work. So that's just why you might not be able to see those, but they are worth searching. There are a lot of good quality sketches there. So what's also nice about the Operation Write Home sketches is they have measurements. So if you want to really just follow something strictly, you totally can. I'm not going to do that. As you've probably realized throughout this video, I am seeing on the sketch that there's one long skinny rectangle, one big wide rectangle, and then a small little rectangle. And my small rectangle is going to be my card element, which is my cutout part element that I've mounted on cardstock. And that's going to be 2.5 by 2, even though the sketch says it should be 2 by 1 3/4. That's going to be okay. It's still going to work. And, but some of the other measurements, I just let them be like a guide, which I think I've explained throughout the video, but that's what I recommend. So for instance, I'm actually working with 3x3 squares, even though that's not super close to what the sketch shows, because again, it's a square and the sketch is showing rectangles. But my thought process there is that, well, a 3x3 square cuts perfectly out of 6x6 pattern paper. There will be no scrap, and I don't want to scrap. So that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes I use a Swingline guillotine trimmer, which I have been much happier with than my previous Fiskars like slider trimmers. And I'm not saying that the Swingline trimmer is like the best trimmer ever, but I'm saying that it works well for me. The blades don't dull. I don't have to constantly replace blades. My Swingline guillotine trimmer just works and works and works and works and works. And I like that. It cuts things more smoothly and straighter. However, it is hard to cut anything less than 1 inch. So these little 1/2 inch strips are a bit tricky. And so sometimes I just switch to my scissors, and they might not cut perfectly. I don't know about you, but I am not the most perfect cutter in the world. But I do an okay job, and it generally works out. But that's the one downside of my Swingline trimmer, if anyone was, curious about that paper trimmer that I've been using. So I'm using this 3x3 square, and then I'm using, I want to say probably like 1 by 2.5 or so, or 1.5 by 2.5 square. Rectangle, that's not a square. And I'm just kind of layering them on in a similar way to the sketch, but it's obviously not exactly like the sketch. So I let it be my guide. I am putting the square over the rectangle and then the long skinny strip rectangle over the whole thing, the way it is in the sketch. and then layering my focal point image on top. Some of these images that I'm using, my focal points here, don't have sentiments again, but they also don't particularly have room on the element itself to stamp. So I'm stamping under it, and to me that's kind of taking the place of those 3 little dots that are in the sketch is by adding the sentiment there. So again, I am using the sketch, but just in the most abstract way possible, I guess. Next up, I kind of veer away from my original sketches, and they're not really working for me anymore. At this point in the video, I've probably made 20-ish cards. And so for me, a couple things that I like to do when I'm making 6x6 paper pads, 6x6 paper pad cards, I guess, or I'm trying to use a whole paper pad. I will start off with a few easy ones. I'll follow a sketch a little bit more closely, or I'll do something super obvious, and then I'll try to get a bit more creative, and then I'll kind of hit a lull again, like, because, it's a couple hours of crafting, and I don't know about how it works out for you, but when I'm making a lot of cards, that happens to me. I have this, like, little lull, and I'm not as inspired anymore. Like, the ideas aren't flowing, the cards aren't, like, pumping out as fast. And so what I do when that happens is I, again, go back to, like, a really simple idea or a simple sketch if I can find one. And so what I'm doing right now is one of those simple ideas. And I'm going to put a large chunk of pattern paper in the center. I'm going to put a strip all the way across the card. And then I'm going to put one of the elements sort of on the strip. So in this case, I'm going to, like, kind of hang it down from it or up from it. And so you kind of see the basic design there. Like, it's a really, really simple design, but it's like helping me kind of get over this lull. Now, with the Doodlebug pad, I was a bit disappointed because it has foil accents, and which is cool, and it costs a little bit more because of those foil accents. P.S. So, like, if you notice, hey, usually they're like $6 or $7, and this one's $8 or $9. It's because of the foil accents, and they might not show up super well on camera, and there's not a lot of them. But that's where the extra cost is coming from for this collection. Still a great value overall for the amount of cards you can make, but just something to consider. Anyway, what I wanted to say is one of my foil pieces wasn't foiled. So, like, I paid a little extra for this pad because of the foiling, and then unfortunately, one of the little confetti dot ones that was supposed to be foiled wasn't. And I didn't reach out to Doodlebug about it because it really wasn't that big a deal to me. But it probably, you certainly could, and you could ask them about it, and maybe they would have done something. But it wasn't that big a deal. But what I wanted to say about that, so I decided for that one, I would use the back, which is this blue stripe, which is good because I like having those big neutral pieces too. But then the strip across it is that confetti dot. And so I used the scrap that actually had the foil for that. And then I used, again, anytime where there was the one piece that didn't have the foil, I just used the other side, which is the great thing about double-sided paper is that if you don't like one side or something's wrong with one side, you can still get away with it. Like, you can, you're still going to be able to use it. It's not going to go to waste. You're going to find something you like about it. So, and they're all going to match no matter what too, which I've already mentioned, but like needs to be pointed out because, that's the hard part about using pattern paper is when you're using paper from two different collections, you're like, these, I think they're going to go great. And then you realize they're like two slightly different shades of dark blue. But you don't have to worry about that when you just go for it with a single collection. And you can wind up using things together that you might not ordinarily. Like, I'm using a lot of graphics with florals, which might not be like the instinct to do, but when they come from the same paper pad, the colors will bind them together. And so this is another example of like a more simple card, but it's also where I'm just kind of pulling from the scraps on the side over there. So I did purposely cut those big, large chunks of yellow and paired it with one of the floral cut-aparts. But then those two little strips of blue, of the darker blue papers, those are more of just like what's on the table next to me that needs to be used. Hey, do they look good together? Let me play with them. And I also will spend a lot of time, and I don't always film these parts, and I do try to make these videos somewhat reasonable, although if you look at the time, it's going to be 40 minutes here, so if you're tired of me, I'm sorry. Again, feel free to mute and listen to some songs, or stop and go over to the blog post and just take a look at the cards. Anyway, I have these large pieces of the foil paper. So this is one of the foils. You can kind of see it here. It's kind of glinting in the light. It's this foil stripe. And so I decided, because it was the foil piece, I would use it a little bit bigger. A lot of the pattern papers from this collection I have cut down smaller. I haven't, in the past, when I've made 6x6 paper pad tutorials, I've chopped a lot of the paper to just under the size of a card. So I would chop it to like 4 by 5 1/4 when the card was 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I would use these big, large pieces of paper. A couple things about that. One, when you do that, the quality of the cardstock for the like card base is a little less relevant because you have a lot of like layers over it. So that is something to consider. But it also, you can't create as many cards with it because you wind up using big chunks of the pattern paper, and then you often layer a bunch of stuff over it. So you've used these big chunks of paper, and which is kind of nice because you go through the paper pad maybe a bit more quickly, but then you're left with a lot of little tiny scraps that you can't do the same thing with, because then you have all these like 6 by 2 inch strips. And I've talked about how to use them in the past, and I do honestly try, and I hope that this comes through, make sure that when I do 6x6 paper pad tutorials, I'm not cutting the papers in the same exact way, that I'm not creating the same exact design of card as I did last time, and that you feel like you got some new, fresh ideas, some new ways to use them each time. Maybe not everyone agrees with that, but I try at least. So, but yeah, so then you wind up all these little scraps and you can't do that anymore. So this time I sort of vowed to like not chop my paper in such a uniform way. However, I'd used up most of the little tiny pieces, and I was left with the big chunks that I had bought. And I don't usually buy the 12 by 12 piece, but it was available when I ordered this from scrapbook.com all those many, many moons ago when I did order it. So I thought, well, they do certainly make for really fast cards. And I've done that before, where like I go to the scrapbook store and I don't have any, we don't have any more local scrapbook stores by me, which I kind of understand why, because we can all only buy so much and it's hard to compete with online. But when there was local scrapbook stores, I would do that. Like I would go to the scrapbook store and buy a 12 by 12 piece of pattern paper that had all these cut aparts that I think are like kind of meant for Project Life, or I don't know, but they had them, and they're like little cute images, and they make for really fast, fun cards. So I would buy them, and then like maybe 1 or 2 sheets from the same collection, and I could make a lot of cards that way too, which is super fun. So when I saw the cut apart sheet available at the same shop and it didn't really change my shipping, whatever, I went for it. But I also bought these stickers. And I haven't used a single one. We've made 20 plus cards, and I'm running out of supplies. I am left with scraps over there and not much else. A few pieces of pattern paper left, but I haven't used a single sticker. And at this point, I'm trying to decide, do I even try to use the stickers? Because if I don't use them now, they're not going to coordinate with a different pad of pattern paper. They're what to do with them. So I will get back to you on that later in the video. But just wanted to point that out there because I had showed you at the beginning of the video that these stickers were going to be somehow relevant, and they haven't been yet. Again, going to cut a banner. Again, cut from the center. Makes it a lot easier. They don't turn out perfect. You can buy a die that does it, and I have dies that do it, but I want to keep this fast. I've said before in the same video, I want to keep it moving. And here I'll do a really simple card. I'll pull in some scraps to layer on there and make little banners real quick. And kind of at this point, I'm just going to start playing with whatever is left. sometimes this creates some of my favorite cards. I think like, oh, I can't possibly use any more of this paper. This is garbage. This is a pile of garbage next to me. And then I'll make a card that I'm like, oh, that would have been like fun to make a bunch of. So just something to keep in mind that, but I also want to show it in the video. So the videos tend to slow down a little bit here, where like in the past, I was arranging and making like 8 cards and showing you how to cut all these pieces. And now I'm making like one slow card at a time. And that is because I am really in like use it up scrap mode. And I think, or I hope that when I'm doing those, that's helpful to you, because I think that a lot of us hold on to these little scraps because they're beautiful, pretty pattern paper that meant a lot to us when we bought it and we enjoy it. But we like, and so we just kind of hold on to them. And then, since coming up with this way of making these 6x6 paper pad tutorials for you guys, but also for myself because I want to use my supplies, I have been more adventurous with actually just starting to piece together little pieces of pattern paper. And so I just want to talk about it and show you a little bit, and hopefully that helps. So I had those little 4 by like 1 inch pieces, and it created 2 nice strips to ground one of these cut apart elements. Now I have basically only cut apart elements, and like literally all the pattern paper that I have left. I thought I had some pieces, but I don't. It's literally all that's in that right hand corner there. That is it. So on this card, I'm just going to combine 2 of those little journaling cards or cut apart elements or whatever you want to call them together to take up most of the card, because there's not really anything going on with that yellow one anyway. I probably could have added the stickers to that card at this point, and I realized that. But I would still then just be using like 2 or 3 stickers from that whole sticker sheet. So I wasn't sure if I really wanted to like dip into it for that. I'm going to pull back the stamps again. So those Create a Smile stamps, I'm going to pull them out. I'm going to stamp them down. When I am stamping just sentiments, my preferred black ink is VersaFine Onyx black ink, but use whatever ink you have. I just think it generally gives a pretty prominent stamp. Like when you stamp it, it stamps well the first time. However, other inks like the MFT or the Simon Says stamp or Memento or whatever, like those are great for Copics, but then they don't always stamp perfectly, and I don't want to get out my stamp positioner. I'm using stamp blocks. Okay, so now I have made what I think is all of the cards I am going to make, because as I mentioned, I had that teeny tiny pile of scraps in the corner, and that was it. Like they are all less than an inch in, both directions, or like maybe 2 inches by half an inch. So at this point I'm like, there's nothing left. And so I'm ready to embellish. And I decide for this video, instead of using up some ribbon or, whatever other embellishment I could use up, today's use up embellishment is going to be enamel dots or enamel shapes. In the past, I've avoided these because I do donate a lot of my cards, and I donate them to organizations that serve children. And sometimes, like for really young children, these little elements might be a choking hazard. Couple of things about that though. And I like to make some cards that like I wouldn't have to worry about at all. They could pass out to anyone and they would be great. But I also know that they're like grown-ups giving these cards to children. Someone's passing them out, sometimes a nurse or staff at the hospital. And so I think they'll probably make a good choice. Like, hey, that has a small little element on it. Let's not give it to the 3-year-old. Let's give it to one of the teenagers who needs a card and a little like pick me up. But there's also other organizations I donate to. And I donate a lot of my cards. You've watched my channel, you know that I mention it. And I mention it not so that everyone knows how awesome I am and like to brag. I mention it because I have collected a bunch of resources on my blog for how you can donate your cards. It brings me a lot of joy to make cards for others, but I only can send so many cards to my family and friends, so I donate. And I encourage you, if like that's one way that you would like to give back and share your talent, to go to the card donation resources page on my blog and find an organization that speaks to you and donate there. So I just pulled out a giant pile of all my enamel dots, and I'm going to go through and see what I can use up. in some ways, I feel like this wasn't the most effective use it up strategy. Like one of the more effective ones would have been like to find a particular set of enamel dots that coordinated, like every single color on the sheet coordinated, and just focus on using up a single sheet. Instead, I wound up finding like this particular dark blue that looked good with it, and I've used up a lot of that dark blue, but it's not going to help me use up the rest of that sheet, so it's not like going to eliminate something from my stash. However, still good to have used them up and to have given them purpose. I have a ton of these enamel shapes here. These are from Create a Smile. I used to be on the Create a Smile video team when they had one, and so I have a bunch of them. And also because like for a very temporary time, I was like pretty obsessed with enamel shapes because they're so cheap and cute and they, you know, like use on cards. And then I didn't use them for a long time. So, you know, resist the temptation. But here are, you know, what I'm going to use. I love the arrows. That was one of the reasons that I did buy so many packs of these, because so many enamel shapes were just like the dots or the hearts, which are fun. But the dots are like a little boring. However, I liked that these little arrows kind of draw attention to your focal image. So I'm just going to keep going through all my cards and adding little shapes where it makes sense. But I'm not going to show you all of that because it'll get boring, because it already probably was boring. So here I am. I've got 2 full sheets of stickers. I have one little house cut apart, or big, it's one of the big ones. I have the big one left and all those scraps. And so here I'm going to show you all of the cards that I made. Some of them have 2 of the same design and some have 1. When they're the little cut aparts, there's usually 2. And if they were the big cut apart, there's only 1, because there was only 1 of the cut apart, or when there's 2 of the little ones. And I'm like, I'm going to toss whatever's left in the recycling and we're good to go. And then I'll do something with the stickers I'll tell you about in just a second. But I was feeling pretty good at this point. And I've been added all my enamel shapes. And again, you can go to the blog and kind of see where I put them all. And if I put it on one card, I put it on the other, which helped me again use a bit more of them because there are 2 of many designs. And I'll mention on the blog when you see the picture, hey, there's 2 of this one, but only 1 picture, just to save on some time there. But I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to use up as much of this paper pad. So I could just put that in the recycling because there's like nothing left. But no, I'm going to make another card. And I really liked this card. It was exactly what I was talking about before, where like sometimes you're like, yeah, there's nothing left. And you make one more card and then you turn out like that was one of your better cards. So honestly, that's how I felt about this one. I am going to do like a sort of patchwork inspired thing because it's this like pretty little house image. And what that made me think of was like homey quilts, and especially because all of these patterns, well, not all of them, but like a lot of them have this sort of like quilted feel to me, like all the florals and like the pretty colors of them and like the crisscross patterns. I don't know, like I look at them and I thought patchwork quilt. Like, so if I put all these little pieces along the outside of the house, it'll kind of have that fun effect, and I'll use up all these like really random, useless looking scraps. The only thing I did say is, or I did feel is I couldn't use the pink ones because I didn't like how the pink border on the house looked with the pink bits of pattern paper. Like they didn't really stand out, and to me it kind of took away from it. So I'm just using up all the other ones that I can, and there will still be a few things that wind up in the recycle pile. But I got a whole other card out of it, which was really exciting. And I actually did use up more. So I'll just fit them all around the edge. Just kind of use what you have. I had to trim up a few of them to make them fit. I tuck them under and over each other, etc., etc. And just to make sure, I kept going, like putting it over the card. And that was to make sure that I wasn't accidentally making it longer than the card. And it kind of left, while it's an uneven border, a pretty similar uneven border all around the edges. And then I can stamp the little sentiment that I already had on the block, finish that up, and add that little enamel heart on the top because I had those out already still, and call it a day and call that one more squeezed card out of this paper pad because I had 34 and now boom, 35. So that is it for my video today. I hope you enjoyed this 6x6 paper pad tutorial and that you had as much fun watching me make the cards as I did making the cards, that I encourage you to go pull out one of your 6x6 pads. I will leave you links to the products that I use in the video description in case you do want to try this particular pad out and don't have it yet, and to my card drive resources and my other videos and like all kinds of more like inspiring educational stuff, hopefully, not just like, here, go buy some products. But there are affiliate links, which supports my channel, and I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that you took the time to spend with me today because this was a super long video, but thank you so much. As another way to say thanks, I want to give away those stickers. I didn't use them. Maybe one of you all would enjoy them. So if you'd like to win the stickers, leave me a comment below on your favorite card or anything you want to comment on, and I will pick somebody and I will comment back to you so you can send me an email. So look, for a reply to your comment, and it doesn't matter where you live, any open international, and this is, not sponsored by anyone. It's just one crafter to another trying to say thanks. So I hope you have an awesome day. Bye.